Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Classic Gamer 74. I am your host, Anthony Gamer. And I'm Larry the Lion. No, you're not. Just kidding. And in today's episode, we're going to have another arcade versus port. And this time, we're going to be discussing Double Dragon. Now, if this is your first time joining us, welcome. Now, if you're not familiar with arcade versus port, I'll explain it to you real quick. That is where we compare an arcade game to its various ports. Now, if you're wondering what is a port, that is where you take an arcade game and they make that game available for different consoles and or computers. Yep. And then what they do, or what we do, is that we check out arcade games and the ported games and compare them and contrast. Exactly. One thing to keep in mind, though, is that sometimes the port of an arcade game is not going to be very close to the original arcade game. That's right, because up until the last few years, no game console or computer had the ability to replicate an arcade game pretty much perfectly. Exactly. And with that in mind, you have to just take into account that the port is not going to be a mirror image of the arcade game. Now, sometimes they get really way off. Oh, you said it. And then there's times where the programmers create the game as close to the arcade as possible, even with the limitations of that particular console or computer. Okay, so enough talking. Let's get into the game itself. You ready? Oh, yeah. All right, then. Let's check out the arcade game Double Dragon and its various ports. Okay, now Double Dragon was a beat-em-up game that was created by Technos Japan and distributed in North America by Taito. This game is considered one of the best examples of this genre, and it actually inspired several other game companies to make their own beat-em-up games. There were 2 arcade sequels to Double Dragon, lots of spin-offs, TV shows, cartoons, and other great marketing ideas. Right you are, Mumford, and we will definitely be talking about the sequels and the spin-offs in a later episode. I promise you that. Now, in this game, you take on the role of Billy and Jimmy Lee, or as they were called in America, Spike and Hammer. And you can actually have 2-player cooperative gameplay, which was probably something that was actually not common in those days, and since has become quite common. The brothers are fighting through a post-apocalyptic world trying to rescue Billy's love interest, Marion, and she has been taken by the Black Warriors, or the Shadow Warriors, depending on where you play the game, and you use a repertoire of martial arts techniques by using the joystick and the 3 action buttons. You got some pretty cool moves there, basic punches, kicks, throws, elbow strikes, drop kicks, you name it, you can pretty much do it. You fight your way through 4 missions, fighting against a variety of enemies, trying to make your way to the hideout of the gang, the Shadow Warriors, and rescue Marion and defeat them. Alright, so let's check out some game footage. Okay, so you can see how the game starts. The Shadow Warriors take off with Marion, and now here comes Billy Lee to rescue them. You do have a variety of moves at your disposal, and you have a whole bunch of enemies to fight against, like that big guy Bobo and that other guy Williams, and you can pick up and use weapons as well. Now each mission has a boss. Now this is the boss at the end of this one. Kind of looks like a Bobo, but he's a lot tougher and quicker. This is mission 2, where you're going to be fighting against people in a factory. And you also have a variety of weapons to use, such as the bat And then the boss is this guy, Jeff, who has the same moveset you do, but he's just a lot tougher and quicker than you. Now, in the third mission, you're going through the woods, and you probably get overran a lot by these Abobos, which is actually how the mission ends. You actually have to fight 2 Abobos at the same time. Like, one wasn't bad enough. Now, in the fourth mission, you are back again fighting a variation of Jeff before you infiltrate the bad guys' hideout. And of course, he's tougher than he was the first time you fought him. And the final boss is a big green Abobo, kind of like a Hulk one, but also very fast and very tough. But if you figure it out, you can pretty much beat him. Alright, now this is the final mission. Trying to get through this first part is pretty much impossible. This is the part of the game where you get a lot of quarters chomped away. I don't know how to get through it real easily. Sometimes jumping like that works, other times it doesn't. It's just hit or miss. And finally you fight against Willie the boss, and more Jeffs protecting him. Willie, as you see, carries a machine gun. The best thing to do when fighting against Willie, stay close to him. If you give him any distance at all, he'll shoot that machine gun at you and you'll lose a life. And of course, like any big gang leader, he has his minions supporting and trying to protect him. But if you can take Willie out, they'll run like cowards. But the problem is taking him out, because he's pretty tough. It's not hard enough to fight him without having his buddies there to protect him. There's an old myth that you can actually knock the gun out of his hand and use it against him, but that must be some kind of cheat, because every time I played it, he falls down with the gun and picks it back up again. So, another one of those urban myths. Notice how I'm staying close to him. I'm not giving him any space. You gotta stay real close to him in order to keep from getting shot. And sometimes it's best to ignore the took him out. To ignore the Jeffs and take him out. But I just felt like hitting him because he pissed me off. Okay, and so you rescue Marion and you live happily ever after. If you are playing 2-player co-op, though, you have to fight your partner at the end in order to see who gets to get Marion. As Double Dragon made quite a bit of money, and some people will argue that it actually rescued the video game industry, and the fact that it got critical acclaim and was extremely popular with the fans, it made sense that it was going to get ported out to just about every home console and computer out there. Yup, so let's check out some of those ports and see how they hold up to the original. One thing you have to keep in mind when in regards to these ports is that most of the consoles of that time only had 2 buttons or sometimes 1. So therefore you had to get used to the controls because in the arcade you had 3 buttons to work with. The jump and the punch and the kick. Right you are. Now, one of the first ports I ever played was this one. This is the NES version of the game. One of the problems with the NES game right from the start is it does not have 2-player co-op. Now, there have been some reasons given as to why. One of the ones that I've heard is for technical reasons because of the limitations of the cartridge. Not only could you not have 2 players simultaneously, but you could only have 2 enemies at a time on screen. Right, and you couldn't take the weapons with you for a long period of time, as pretty much after the screen you got them from, they disappear. I think, again, that was another programming issue. Yeah, it was. I remember one time I watched you play the arcade version, and you carried that bat from the beginning to the end. Oh yeah, I actually one time was able to carry the bat through 2 missions. No way, oh yeah. Now, because of the fact that they weren't able to have 2-player co-op with this game, in a lot of ways they did try to rewrite it. In this version of Double Dragon, there are missions, much like in the arcade, of course. However, the gameplay is kind of different. You have to earn these hearts by getting different amounts of points, which allow you to learn more moves. more kicks, more punches, and other fun stuff like that. Now, another thing that either really excited people or made them mad was the fact that this game wasn't just a straight beat 'em up. Sorry. This game had a lot of puzzle elements and platforming elements in it as well. My biggest complaint, though, with this game is the timer. I mean, there's been times where I played this game and I almost beat it, but then the time ran out. Yep, that was one of the problems with it. But to be honest with you, I think with the limited amount of memory that they had to work with, I think they did a pretty good job. If not, almost adding like their own little story to an already established story. Now, the Sega Master System port of this game was actually better received than the Nintendo version. As you can see, the colors are very bright, much brighter than they are in the NES version. And of course, you had the two buttons to kind of get used to. I'm not going to keep saying that because, you know, that's something you got to get used to pretty much with every port. Oh, that's right. But anyway, this also had the ability to have two-player co-op, and a lot of fans felt that this game was more faithful to the original than the NES because, as I said, not only did it not have two-player co-op, but as I said, in a lot of ways, they kind of tried to rewrite the whole story. So it just depends on what you prefer. Me, myself, personally, I like the imaginative way that they did Double Dragon in the NES, but for the purist in me, I have to say that I do really like the I almost said NES again, the Sega Master System version as well. So I kind of like both of them. Yeah, I agree with you, but me personally, I like this one because I'm kind of more of a purist myself. Okay. Alright, now we're going to look at one of my least favorite ports, and this is Activision making this port of Double Dragon for the Atari 2600. Yeah, one button, and I didn't like the sprites. I found the game to be very hard to do. The moves were, you know, just pretty much just not good at all, and the collision detection was bad. Yeah, it just was a game that probably shouldn't have been made. I mean, I give Activision credit for trying, but this is not my least favorite, but it's pretty close to the bottom in my opinion. Now, the Atari 7800 version wasn't a whole lot better. The graphics were an improvement, and you had two buttons at your disposal, but I really just didn't care for it. One reason is because the enemy was running all over the place, and you pretty much had to chase him down, kind of like the original WrestleMania for the NES. Another thing I didn't like is it took forever to beat your opponents. I mean, you had to knock them down several times before they were knocked out. So, good attempt. Like I said, I like the fact that they were able to add that music to it, but overall, like the 2600 version, this one pretty much falls flat. Now let's look at the Amiga port. Now, I really like this one myself. What about you? Oh yeah, one thing I really liked, I love the rich colors. The sprites are good. I mean, you can tell that this was an Amiga port because Amiga really seemed to do a great job with a large percentage of their ports that they did. Oh yeah, for sure. But to be honest, one of my complaints again is the fact that the enemies are just so tough. It takes a while to take them down. Not like in the arcade where you knock them down, I think, like 2 or 3 times and they're gone. But as I said, they really put a lot of effort into making this game as close to the arcade as they were able to. But like I said, or as you said, excuse me, Amiga was always pretty good when it came to making ports. Both it and the Commodore. Those were two computers that really took making ports as close to the arcade as possible with the amount of memory that they had. Okay, now here we have the Amstrad CPC port. Now, if you're not familiar, the Amstrad CPC was a computer that was only available in the UK. As nice as the colors were on this, I thought this game had too much drag. The the response from hitting the button to what happens on screen is a little bit off, and as you can see, it's just kind of a slower paced game, as to where the arcade and most of the ports were pretty fast paced. Yeah, this one graphically was very nice, but as far as playing goes, I have to say no. Now, some people are not going to really like the ZX Spectrum or the Specky port of Double Dragon, but to be honest with you, even if you're not a big fan of the Spectrum's color scheme, I'll tell you what, the action in this game is pretty fluid, and all things considered, they keep pretty close to the arcade game. With the limitations of the Specky, I think they did a bang-up job here. No pun intended. I couldn't agree with you more. Like you said, the action was pretty fast and fluid, just like the arcade. I think a lot of people really don't give the ZX Spectrum its due, because it really did a great job with not just this port, but a lot of other ones. Alright, and our final game for today is from the Atari Lynx. I just thought of something. What's that? This is the first time we've shown an Atari Lynx game on here. Oh, it sure is. Now, this version was pretty cool. The only problem with it is that you had a lot of action going on that little screen. And sometimes you would go for a drop kick, and on your way back down, they could recover and get you on the way down. But they did a pretty good job of trying to keep it as usable as possible. That's the best way to put it, because even though they had a small screen to work with, they put a lot of action into that small screen, and they made the sprites big enough so you didn't have to squint in order to play it. Now, for those of you that aren't familiar, the Atari Lynx was a handheld console that Atari put out in the early 90s. It was kind of supposed to be their answer to the Game Boy. And although it had some great games for it, and it was a great system, it didn't catch on quite as well as they thought it would, or hoped it would. It's kind of developed a cult classic nowadays, but in the original time when the game console came out, it wasn't a big hit. Anyway, back to Double Dragon. My only complaint about this, other than that small screen, was that this game had no continues. Once you died, you lost all 3 lives, you had to start all the way from the beginning. Just about every other version of this game actually had multiple continues so that you could beat it. Also, you could link this up with someone else's links, and you could have 2-player co-op on it. So it's they were really thinking ahead when they came out with this. The levels aren't identical to the arcade as much as they really try, but it's pretty much the same game and about the best you're going to get from a handheld console. Well, that brings us to the end of another episode of Classic Gamer 74. I really hope you all enjoyed it. If you did, you know what to do. Give me a great big thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't already. And don't forget to click that little bell icon down there so you'll be notified when we upload new episodes. In our next episode, we're going to discuss hunting games, some old and some new, so you will not want to miss that. What about the Double Dragon? We'll wrap that up in 2 weeks. Okay, so next week, it's all about the thrill of the hunt. Until next time, this is Anthony Gamer, and I'm Mumford, reminding you all to take care of yourselves, stay healthy, stay inside if you can. I mean, that's why he's here with us. Yeah, I got tired of the nursing home, so he came and got me. Right, exactly. The only problem is his wife doesn't make Jell-O as good as they do there. Her Jell-O is just fine. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to make Jell-O. Oh, yeah? How come there's no fruit in hers? Anyway, all right, until next time, have a great day, and we will see you in the next episode. Goodbye. Goodbye.